Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Expressions for the New Indian Express. I have with me the wonderful Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, one of the kindest people I know. She's a self-made billionaire, runs a 7 billion worth company. I can't even wrap my head around those zeros, but that's not really why she's who she is. She speaks her mind. She stands up for what she believes in. She has tremendous kindness and tremendous love for people. And she really is an all out superstar, one of the most wonderful people I've ever come across. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy you've got the post COVID glow, right? You're looking wonderful, but I know that you've just come out from battling COVID, and it's either got frightened and run away, or you've been doing something really right. So talk about how it was to get the disease. I mean, quite scary.
So, Kaveree, thanks for those very kind and generous remarks. And, I also think so much of you because you're such a wonderful person. So, this sounds like a
Mutual.
society. But anyway, let me start by saying that, there is a fear in everyone's mind about COVID. And I, for one, as a scientist, as someone who understands what this disease is all about, because of course we are, learning as we speak. I mean, this is a disease that people have not understood at the early stages, and then they started understanding what the disease was doing. And now, of course, we have a much deeper understanding of the mechanism of this disease and how it works and how there are two phases of this disease, etc., etc. So I'll actually talk about it a little later.
Yeah.
But to your question, I think when I tested positive, the first thing in my mind was, don't panic, be fearful. After all, you have understood what this disease is about.
Right.
Treat this disease in a scientific manner and see if you can overcome this disease through this kind of a scientific rationale, and then you'll feel much stronger.
Right.
Therefore, the first thing I did was I wanted to share the fact that I tested positive. I know there's so much stigma associated with this disease. I know of really sad cases where anyone who tests positive is shunned by their neighbors, by their communities. They don't even want to them to live in their homes.
Right.
And they don't even want to provide services to their home and things like that. It's shocking. I felt that, since I'm an influencer, I should say that I tested positive. And then once I overcame the virus, obviously I wanted to share my experience so that I allay the fears of people in terms of testing positive and, dealing with the disease. So my experience, of course, was a mild bout of the disease. It wasn't something that you hear about in many of these reports. I basically, when I tested positive, I wanted to see whether I had high viral load or, moderate viral load or low viral load. I was in that moderate category, but I knew that that was just the starting of the replication stage when I tested positive. So I knew that I could actually increase the viral load in a few days because it replicates. The fact that I didn't have a very high temperature, I knew it sort of gave me an advantage. And then what I did was I started basically monitoring my oxygen levels and my inflammatory markers. Because just to explain to you, Kaveree, this disease has two phases. The first phase is the viral phase, okay, where your body is actually fighting the virus. And in 80% of our population, it will just end with the first phase, like it happened in my case. So your body fights the virus and out goes the virus and you're back to normal. Okay? But for 20% of people, for some reason, this virus also elicits a hyperimmune response, which is the start of complications. And that response that the body gives in these 20% of people can spiral out of control. So initially, when the this response happens, your own T cells start basically triggering a the cytokine response. Cytokines, in a very layperson speak, is that the body starts producing poison darts
Right.
to attack an invader.
Right.
In this case, it starts attacking your own cells.
Right.
And these cells are your endothelial cells. So that's why you hear about, of course, and it all happens with a lot of inflammation.
Right.
So what happens is that your lungs, your gut, and of course your vascular system also gets damaged, the endothelial cells. That's what they're finding out. And once that happens, it starts inflaming and causing, say, like for instance, vascular damage causes microclots and embolism, which is very life-threatening.
Right.
In your lung case, it inflames your passages, all the, your pulmonary passages.
So you can't breathe.
And so your oxygen intake gets much lower.
Right. Right.
And then in your gut, you get sort of diarrhea and, those kind of problems. So these are the symptoms that you're dealing with. Now, all this time, I think most clinicians were only treating the symptoms and not the cause.
Right.
You had breathing difficulty or hypoxia or lower oxygen saturation levels, they were giving you more oxygen.
Yeah.
Now, that's not going to solve the problem. That's
right.
aggravated further.
Yeah.
Or for that matter, of course, the only thing that they did respond to in terms of vascular damage was to give you low molecular weight heparin to prevent blood clotting, which was a good way of dealing with it. And steroids also are being used to reduce the inflammation, which is also a very good way of dealing with it. So I think we are learning so much about this disease that it's important for us to know how to deal with the disease. Now we've had a little bit of a setback on the vaccine.
Yeah.
Do need good treatments.
Right.
And there are good treatments and treatments are improving and the mortality rate is going down.
Right.
We ourselves have a repurposed drug, which is actually bang on in terms of addressing this disease when it spirals out of control.
That is that itolizumab.
Itolizumab, yes.
Right. But did you get to use it? Did you use it at any point? Or?
I didn't have to use it because I didn't go beyond
you
the
didn't go beyond that.
phase,
Right.
But actually, this drug is now has benefited over 1,000 patients.
Wow.
Close to 2,000 patients, in fact, have started using this drug. And I would say that I myself have monitored this particular drug, this use of this drug in 2 or 3 patients who have all come out fine.
Right.
I know how it works. It basically disrupts that whole process which triggers the cytokine response.
Right.
Therefore, the body recovers very fast. If you try to keep on trying to deal with it in a slow way, it causes more damage.
Right. So I read your piece as well when you discussed how you overcame it. It was very rational and very scientific, and I think it did a lot to, as you said, allay fears, because your response was not emotional or psychological. It was just rational and very scientific. So that I wish is the way everyone would react to a situation like this. But the other thing that struck me was what Dr. Devi Shetty said recently, that beds don't treat patients, doctors and nurses do. And I think that is where, we really need to relook at the healthcare system. And you've been a great advocate of that as well. Because this kind of knowledge can only come with more experience and come with, good doctors and nurses. So talk a little about how the healthcare system in India has coped with this.
So, COVID has actually exposed how weak our healthcare system is.
Right.
And it also opened up opportunities for us with which we could strengthen it. For instance, during the lockdown, I don't think people realize the role that ASHA workers played in coping and managing with and tracking the disease, really. And I think they did a phenomenal job. I know how much they did, at least in our state of Karnataka, where every single, village, taluka, district, town, city had ASHA workers going door to door, looking at families, were there any symptoms? They went down to even going to pharmacies to see who's buying cough syrup.
Right.
Because in the early days, nobody knew what the symptoms of COVID were or whether they should even worry about it. So they went to that extent. And we were really keeping it under control because I think it had been decentralized.
Yeah.
And everyone at the taluk level was told, at the panchayat level was told, you guys deal with COVID. Please track down any cases of fever or flu-like symptoms and make sure that you report it, make sure that you test them, and make sure that you treat them in whatever at that time was available, okay, as known medication. And we were doing extremely well. But the moment we lifted the lockdown, we somehow got into this war room concept. Every state has a war room and a COVID task force, but it's too centralized.
Right.
You're not using all the resources that you have at hand. And and as Dr. Devi Shetty very rightly said, it's not about beds. Today, I can tell you we have created a number of COVID care centers that are just going empty because people don't want to just go and occupy a bed in some remote place where there's no doctor, no nurse. You're there to lie on a bed. You might well want to do that at home.
Right.
So I think we must understand that just the concept of having hospital beds is no longer valid.
Right.
It is about ensuring that you have medical practitioners, and all these medical practitioners don't have to be doctors or specialists, right? You need to have nurse practitioners. You can actually skill the ASHA workers to be much more highly skilled and deliver on various aspects of healthcare. Then Dr. Devi Shetty, at that point when we were having this huge crisis, actually made a very good suggestion. He said, we've got 100,000 nurses who are ready to be graduated, but just because they can't sit for their final exams, can actually make use of them. And go to all our COVID hospitals and work there and say that after 6 months of working, you'll automatically get your certificates.
Absolutely.
The MBBS doctors who had to finish their final exam are in the same plight.
Right.
Why are we not using it? What is this fetish we have for one written exam?
Exactly.
It is crazy. When we think about our education policy, these are the things we need to think about. We are getting too fixated in old ways of thinking about education.
Right.
The best kind of education is this, this experience, this
practical, experiential learning. Yeah.
Experiential learning is the best form of education. And that's what we should be looking at. So I just think we've lost a big opportunity, but it's still not too late because look at the rising numbers. And people are struggling. People have almost thrown up their hands. And I don't think this is about politicians trying to solve the problem. It is not even about bureaucrats trying to solve the problem. It must involve experts and right experts. See, I do think that this is an infectious disease. This is an immunological disease. This is an epidemiological crisis. Why aren't we actually creating task forces or think tanks with all these kind of experts?
Exactly.
Right?
We're just overloaded by cardiologists and, by people who are not necessarily experts in this area.
And by well-known people. Just because I am well-known doesn't mean I know everything about COVID.
Right.
The fact is, I consider myself someone who understands immunology.
Right.
That's why I want to focus on the immunological part of this disease. And I think I understand it much better than many doctors.
Right. So I wanted to bring you back, Kiran, to this point that how can we use this moment of crisis as an opportunity to recast the health education system? Because we've had the national education policy and it says all the right things. It talks about experiential learning, etc. But it doesn't cover medical education, which is
but a good thing has happened in medical education.
Yeah.
Again, thanks to the efforts of Dr. Devi Shetty and a few others.
Right.
Where they've actually said that the biggest challenge we have today is the shortage of specialists. Okay.
Right.
there's a huge shortage of diabetologists, nephrologists, neurologists, you name it, oncologists and so.
Surgeons, even surgeons,
Exactly.
he said, there's a huge
Exactly.
shortage.
And the reason is that our whole medical education is skewed in terms of graduating, 50,000 MBBS doctors a year,
Yeah,
15,000 specialists a year.
right.
Most countries, in fact, they have a huge number of specialists also graduating, almost 1:1, in that sense.
Mm.
So I think that's where we are really, having this problem.
Mm.
Really believe that now what they've introduced is very good. They've introduced a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year diploma,
Okay,
specialization.
right.
What they're basically saying is any MBBS doctor can go to any hospital in the country,
Right.
practice for a year in one specialty, and get a diploma in that specialty at different levels, So it will be like a 1 year diploma, a 2 year diploma, which will be slightly more specialized, and a
Right.
3 year diploma which will almost be like an MD,
Right.
right? So I think this is a very good intervention because you will get, as Dr. Devi Shetty said, today we are producing these droves of MBBS doctors who can't even give an injection.
Yeah.
And now we are going to actually get people to specialize. So if you want surgeons, they can go and intern at various hospitals for that 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years and become good surgeons.
Mm.
And they don't, so you're actually doing it in a very different way. So I think experiential learning, which they've adopted for this diploma programs, I think is very welcome.
Right.
And actually, there was an effort which of this sort, which has actually been, adopted in this case at a countrywide level, where a group of doctors under the API Federation actually had, come together with state governments to give these kind of certificate programs for specialization, and it worked very well.
Right. What are the other opportunities that the healthcare system needs to look at this moment?
So, yeah, that's a good question, Kaveree, because I think what we must understand is that we need to reimagine our healthcare system.
Right.
Today, there is a huge disconnect between urban India and rural India. There is a big difference between private sector and public sector. Okay. Today, we know that when you go to rural India, they hardly have access to decent healthcare. I also believe that we have completely ignored preventive healthcare. The whole thing is skewed in terms of treatment and tertiary healthcare.
Exactly.
So even Ayushman Bharat today is a cashless hospitalization model for universal healthcare. Great, because you're addressing the out-of-pocket expense.
Right.
Ensure that people don't, get into a debt just because of out-of-pocket expense there, and that's very welcome. But the very important part of Ayushman Bharat is the wellness centers. I think the wellness centers have to play that preventive primary healthcare role.
Right.
And I think primary healthcare is what we have ignored all this time.
Right.
Have the primary healthcare concept. So we do have a large number of primary health centers, state level responsibility. Some states have done it well, other states have not. So Kerala has a very good primary health center. A few other states have a very good primary health centers, but most states don't have it. If you just look at what Thailand has done and coped with COVID-19 amazingly well for a country of its size and its economic, stature. It's not a rich country.
Yeah.
It actually dealt with COVID extremely well, much better than most affluent economies. And the single reason ascribed was because it has such an amazing primary healthcare network.
Right.
We were able to use the primary healthcare centers to actually control COVID at the rural level very effectively. That's what we need.
Right.
But we have neglected our primary healthcare sector.
Yes.
And I think we can leapfrog there using technology.
Right.
And I think that's what we need to do. We need to have digital primary healthcare centers, because the first point of importance in any universal healthcare is diagnostics and diagnosis. The moment you diagnose, you are armed with information that allows you to get better outcome.
Right.
It's not, so that is where it starts with. And today, if you go to most villages, they only do it with a stethoscope.
Yes.
Hardly have a diagnostic lab, right? And that's what you need to do. And then we also have the added opportunity to combine Ayurveda with allopathy.
Yes.
I think we should look at that much more seriously than we've been doing in the past. You know that you've got very successful companies like the Himalaya drugs and these Daburs and the Zandus and others. I know many of us use, Kanthil for our sore throat.
No, and you said you used Chyawanprash, and that was one of the things that helped you.
So I think these are not something to be, laughed at.
Of course, yeah.
They have good use, but we need to get science into this.
Yes.
And that's where technology again plays a very important role. I'm sure if you use AI and data analytics, you actually can develop really good phytopharmaceuticals or Ayurvedic medicines.
And what tremendous opportunities it will have, what job opportunities, what, tremendous employment. Look at the kickstart that it can give to the economy.
Yeah.
So why are we not thinking along these lines when we have people like you who are giving such prescriptions that are so valid and workable? Why do we have a 23.9% decline in GDP? Why can't we do something about these things? This is
I think that question.
Opportunity.
I think that question is better posed to the finance ministry.
That is true, but really, does your heart not break at the kind of job losses that you've seen around you? The fact that we haven't had adequate social security, we've not been able to put money in the hands of people who need them, and then we expect the economy to recover. It cannot happen.
See, what really sort of disappoints me, I would say, is that instead of actually looking at healthcare investment, which is really the need of the hour, and especially this pandemic has, exposed the ugly underbelly of what has not been done in healthcare.
All over the world, not just here, but especially
also
here.
In India, we've seen what it has done to us. And we have also looked at many opportunities in the agricultural sector, the healthcare sector, the digital sector. And yet the only thing the government keeps wanting to do is to, suddenly give some dole outs for the festive season.
Exactly.
This is all temporary, spending responses you're going to get. What is the sustainable solution? And like what you said, I think there are a number of sustainable interventions which they're not even looking at. I've been saying, look, this is a time to bring about huge regulatory reforms. This is a time to deliver on a lot of things the Prime Minister initially talked about. The minimum government, maximum governance. The regulatory reforms that we can bring in can really ease up the business environment, okay? Let's not kid ourselves by moving a few ranks in the business, ease of doing business, and pat ourselves on the back, because it's far from the truth, okay? Because just because we announce bankruptcy codes and this code and that code, you go up the ranking. But doing business in India is so tough because the kind of compliance requirements is enormous. No other country imposes this. So this is a time for us to get rid of half the regulations. If you're going to have transparency and trackability on a digital platform where you have online submissions of any compliance requirements, then why do you want all these compliances? You can do away with most of them and just fix on the very few that are really required to be tracked. But instead of that, what are we doing? We're just cut and pasting hard the sort of the physical compliance requirements to a virtual compliance requirement. That is not regulatory reforms. So I think we need to look at that. And this doesn't cost you money.
Exactly.
Right? So I'm saying today, let's not get into fiscal incentives which involve money. It's not going to happen because we really have a problem. But we have an opportunity which is cashless, which is a regulatory opportunity, which can actually bring a lot of feel-good factor into industry, into investment, into investors. The second most important thing is on the policies themselves. I think most people complain that India doesn't have stable and predictable policies.
Right.
If you can actually address those kind of issues, I think you can actually kickstart the economy a lot better. And I think this is also a time to look at GST as a single slab.
Right.
That is also the unpredictability and the instability that people are worried about. One moment the GST is 28%, next moment it is 18%, then somebody else pushes you, it might make it 12%. This kind of flip-flopping of the GST level itself is very worrying to many investors. You should go in boldly with one GST, whether it's 18%, 15%, somebody's even suggested 12%, work it out.
Right.
This is the stimulus package you need. And it's not this business of, oh, we will lose so much GST by bringing down the GST. You're not getting any GST at the higher level.
Right.
To bring it down, at least you'll get something. That's the way to think about it. I think the babus in our finance ministry have a very, microscopic way of thinking, and they don't think out of the box.
Right. The other issue that COVID sort of brought us face to face with was the informal economy. And suddenly we realized that, oh my God, these are people who work for us, with us. They build our cities, they build our homes, they service us. And, where were they, for so many years? And we suddenly saw them out there. Nothing has been done to actually shore up the informal economy. And I wonder the impact on the villages when these migrants have gone back. And I wonder how many of them will return, and how will this informal economy shape up?
See, I think these are very important questions you're asking, Kaveree. I, for one, believe that the informal economy will come back to their former jobs, because I think, let's face it, our villages and our rural heartland can't support so many jobs. Those jobs are really in the the agricultural sector, and there might be some infrastructure development opportunities for them, but by and large the kind of things they do in the cities is not a job they can do in the villages.
Right.
So I think they will come back, okay? But I think what we need to do for them is to give them social security.
Yes.
I think that's something which we've ignored. This is an opportunity. When we do it is a big question mark, but certainly we need to do that. And I think as soon as we start climbing out of COVID is a time to re-look at this whole informal sector in a very different way.
Right. What can we do about it? You've suggested the wage labor fund, and you've suggested a protection of salaries fund as well. Would that be something that you feel?
So I think a wage labor fund is a very important security you can create around the informal sector, and I think we must look at it. I mean, it is like an ESI basically. For employees who are formally employed, you are giving them some protection. I think the informal sector also needs to be given that kind of protection. Why are we basically insisting that an ESI-like model be created for wage, the wage fund? I think that they must be able to have access to some, financial support at times like this, or when they lose a job for no fault of their own.
But if you listen to them, Kiran, then you'll figure that, oh, we didn't even know we had so many people employed in the informal economy, which is so tragic.
I mean, I don't think that's true. I think everybody knew how many were employed.
Exactly.
It's like, for instance, today you have a large number employed, for example, in the construction industry. What has the construction industry is not expected to cover them with any kind of insurance as such. They're just supposed to look after them. And of course, they are always undercounting the number of people they hire and all kinds of, you have to also blame the people. There has to be an ethical approach to any
entrepreneurship.
So I think you need to relook at sectors which are so dependent on this informal sector and make sure that they actually do their bit.
Right. Whether it's construction, whether it's hospitality,
Yeah.
these are sectors I feel has just gotten away by retrenching large number of people without any penalties. And I think it's quite unfortunate. When we talk about compassionate capitalism, this is not how it ought to work, isn't it?
I agree with you, Kaveree. I mean, you're just totally saying what I have been saying. That yes, I don't. I mean, you cannot blame them for retrenching, because if their businesses have shut down, they can't keep paying them. But then they have to compensate.
Exactly.
Just say, okay, here's the yellow slip and you're out tomorrow. I think they have to compensate them, saying, here we are, we don't see this opening for the next 6 months, but here is the compensation we are giving you for laying you off for 6 months at some level, you know.
But also, what kind of businesses are they running that they have no savings and they have nothing to fall back upon? I wonder what kind of capitalism is this?
Yeah, but this is something that we should have addressed a long time ago. I think we are just sort of it's just allowing businesses to run in a very flippant way.
Yeah.
But these are things that are now surfacing, Kaveree, and I think we don't want to over-regulate, because you also don't want people to hang on to jobs who are not performing well.
Right.
So you need to look at it in a very delicate way. It's not just about making sure that they're protected. This is a very unusual time. But I think if you start having a kind of a regulation that says that anybody who's hired has to have some form of social security, and you provide that social security for people, then when they leave, they at least have some thing to,
Fall back. How has your company managed this crisis, Kiran?
See, Kaveree, the good fortune of the healthcare sector is that, this is an essentials sector.
Right.
We have actually hired instead of, laying off people, because we've had to really, of course, what we have had is a bigger problem, which is disruption in our workplace. Because unlike the IT sector that could almost work entirely from home, remotely, we have to have people on the ground, because it's manufacturing, it's R&D, and all the support services that go with it. So we have actually been ramping up from 50% in April to about 90% today. But we also are seeing a few disruptions when people test positive, because these are people who are asymptomatic. But to keep our places safe, we are testing them quite vigorously.
Right.
To make sure that we have a very safe campus. And as we find positive cases, we have to shut down that operation for at least a week before we resume.
Right.
That is a stop and start kind of thing that we have. But by and large, we have not had to lay off anybody. We've actually hired a lot more.
I think that's terrific. And I think that's great advice to students as well. This is obviously a sector that they should look at for future careers, Can we talk a little bit about the vaccine, since, yesterday the clinical trials were halted because of some unforeseen circumstances. You've also been an advocate of safety, safety regulations. So when do you see it happening? When do you see a vaccine coming?
See, Kaveree, I've always been saying that you cannot abbreviate 1 year's data in 3 months.
Yes.
And for a vaccine, it is so essential.
Right.
I can understand accelerated approval for a cancer drug that is suddenly showing a lot of promise in, curing certain kinds of cancers. You might abbreviate it, okay? Because it's an unmet need. It's a huge problem, and there's nothing else. So you're basically saying, okay, if it's showing promise, let's give it accelerated approval. But remember, this is about treating an illness.
Yeah.
A vaccine actually immunizes healthy people.
Right.
So you're basically immunizing someone who's absolutely healthy,
right,
and hoping that you protect them against the virus.
Right.
In order to do that, you have to have a lot of safety data and a lot of efficacy data. And you want to have data on durability of response. Means how long is it going to protect you for?
Right.
At the moment, this warp speed development that everyone is talking about is short circuiting everything. Now, for instance, normally it is a sequential process. So you do a phase 1, then you do a phase 2, and then you do a large phase 3. So the phase 1 is really the dose escalation finding phase, where you realize which is the best dose to give it at and which is the safest dose to give it at. In phase 2, you start studying the efficacy. So you give it to a larger number of people to look at both safety and is it giving you the immune response that you want in a larger number of people. And then in the phase 3, you do it in a very large population where you're basically making sure that it is safe, it is efficacious, and it is protecting you for a desired period of time. Today, what is happening is that they've actually started doing things parallelly.
Right.
Phase 2, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 are almost being run parallelly.
Right.
And this is, by the way, not the first case that this vaccine has actually encountered. A month ago, they had a very similar case, okay, which was not disclosed in public. Now they've disclosed it. But a month ago, they had a very similar neurological problem, which appears to be the same problem, which is called transverse myelitis,
right,
which is, in very simple terms, it's the inflammation of your spinal cord. Now that's quite scary.
That's serious.
Which means that it could basically paralyze you and it could do many serious adverse events. This was seen in a patient 1 month ago.
Okay.
The safety monitoring board looked at that patient and felt it was transient and they could move on.
Right.
This volunteer who has now shown similar transverse myelitis apparently has a more serious condition.
Right.
And so they feel that they will resolve it. But the question to be asked is, this transverse myelitis is just nothing but another term for GBS, that Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Right.
If you remember, was a very serious problem in the H1N1 vaccine.
Right.
It had to be withdrawn. And if this is the same thing, which was seen in many people, and many died also as a result of that,
right,
in that vaccine, and that also was an adenovirus vaccine. So the question begs to be answered, which is this a safe vaccine?
Yeah.
If you're already seeing it in 2 patients, and now you haven't even started the bigger trial, and this happened, I understand, to patients in the US, how are you going to track these cases in other parts of the world?
Right.
So I think AstraZeneca has a lot of explanation to do, and it is suddenly put the fear back into the vaccine program.
Right.
I think we need to look at other adenovirus vaccine programs to see have they seen any such problems,
right,
which they had overlooked. These are the kind of questions you'll have to ask. So a vaccine has to be studied for a long time for safety.
Right.
Now, I'm asking you this question. Even if AstraZeneca says, look, we've resolved the problem and we're going back to our trials, even if it is approved a year later or 6 months later or whenever, I think a lot of people will ask that question as to, do I want to take that vaccine?
Exactly.
Whatever happens to me.
Yeah.
Right? So that is why you have to be very careful not to have hubris in vaccine development. That is why there are no shortcuts in vaccine development. You should not rush vaccine development. And I think it's for the safety of the people across the world that we go through the process. I, for one, believe that we will get safe vaccines, but we cannot rush them.
Right. This is different from the one that is being developed by the Serum Institute, or is this
the same?
It's the same. So we have to, their claims have to be looked at a little, with a little bit of care.
Well, they have been served a show cause notice.
Yeah.
They yesterday, in my view, should not have, made a statement which they made. In my view, they also should have said that in view of the AstraZeneca vaccine program being put on hold. We are also putting our program on hold until we understand what the problem is. But instead of that, they said we are not putting it on hold,
Right.
because it's a different trial. And of course, the drugs controller have sent them a show cause notice saying, why are you not putting your trial on hold? And I think you should put such trials on hold.
Right.
So
What
this is about the science.
yes,
This is not just about doing a trial.
yeah. What about Biocon? Are you involved in any efforts to develop a vaccine?
We are only supporting vaccine development,
Right.
because our company Syngene is actually supporting many of the vaccine developers around the world in providing them with a lot of um, analytical support, assay support. We have very good understanding of measuring antibodies, measuring T cells.
Mm.
We have all these panels set up. And we can also do a lot of characterization of the spike protein, the receptor binding domain, and we have developed some very high-end assays for all this kind of work in vaccines.
So there's a lot of global networking happening in this area, where a lot of global cooperation is happening. So at some point, something will emerge.
Yes. I'm very hopeful that we will get safe vaccines, but not by the end of the year.
Right.
If you do get a vaccine approved by the end of the year, I would be very skeptical of using such vaccines before I get more data.
Right. The other thing I wanted to quickly go back to was the whole idea that you had of preventive medicine. Now, one of the reasons I think that you also, recovered so quickly, thank God, is also because you built your immune system over the years with yoga, walking, the right diet, etc. So, as you said, this is again a great opportunity for the idea of Indian wellness, yoga, Ayurveda. These are things that are so intrinsic to us, and yet we don't seem to appreciate them. How can we make this a more serious business?
I think it's very important to focus on health and wellness. I think yoga and eating right and the kind of various nutritional options we have in India is really something no other part of the world has the
Absolutely.
access to, and
Right.
we must take full advantage of that. And yes, I think the government has, to be very fair, has been putting a lot of focus. But I think we should take um, uh, the shallow part out of it, and we should
Yeah.
focus on the seriousness of these opportunities.
Yeah.
Of course, yoga is something which, of course, our Prime Minister has brought a lot of focus on, which is very good. And I think yoga in this context, everyone is talking about breathing exercises.
Yes.
And Kapalbhati and all the kind of things that we've always been doing as people who at least are introduced to yoga. I think we have to make it almost like in schools. Why don't we actually, like we used to have PT, why can't we make yoga as an essential part of exercise, wellness? So I think it should start from schools, Kaveree. In schools, if we focus on nutrition, if we focus on breathing exercises, yoga, etc., it will really augur well for us.
The national education policy does talk about new subjects like organic living, and it also talks about organic living and I think environmental sciences as well. Do you think that there is an attempt to address some of these issues in that? Have you
I
paid
think
attention?
so. I think there are huge opportunities. I think organic farming has actually opened up huge opportunities for farmers. And we need to basically go about this in a much more cooperative way. You know what I'm saying? We haven't really focused on agricultural cooperatives in a bigger way. The FPOs are a very good model, which we must build on in a much bigger way. I think you can't be doing this in small land holdings and hoping to connect with the bigger markets. I think we need to look at this whole agricultural sector as a much bigger sector for India.
Right. If there's one...
The food whole of the world, apart from being the pharmaceutical or the pharmacy of the world. We can be the, the food world, the food bank of the world.
And perhaps not the right word to use, but as I think you'd used it somewhere, but maybe an exporter of some of the finest healthcare workers as well. I mean,
Of course, of course.
we could look at that as a huge employment opportunity.
Absolutely.
Just that, we have a doctor as health minister. One piece of advice you wish he had listened to or he had implemented during this crisis?
I just think that they needed to manage COVID at a much more aggressive pace when the lockdown lifted. That was the biggest mistake we have made across the country, where we did not make people understand that the lockdown had not driven the virus away. Basically the way it was communicated is we need this long lockdown because we need to get rid of the virus, and most people's understanding was that when the lockdown was lifted, we have chased away the virus and everything is safe now. And that was not well communicated. So I think COVID management has been very, very poor post-lockdown. And I think we have not done it in a way that is decentralized. And I think we've also got too much of top-down decision making. Much of it is flawed. And I think we should actually be willing to let different groups around the country come up with their own models and own thinking, and whatever is working, there should be cross-learning. It is not about one ICMR telling you what to do, but we should have had many state health departments figuring out different models, sharing it through ICMR and letting people do what they want.
Right. And one piece of advice for our finance minister?
I really think we need to look at the economy by removing the regulatory cholesterol and by having much more pragmatic and predictable policies. I think that's what is the order of the day. And I really think it's not about just money. It's about doing a lot of these non-financial things right.
Thank you so much, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw. You've been an absolute gem, and thank you for all the information and all the enlightenment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
May you have the best of health.
Thank you, and you too.
Thank you.